At 26, Madison Clark set out to win a reality show by surviving alone in the Montana wilderness. The rules were simple. The longer she lasted, the more she'd win, with $10,000 earned for every day completed. The forest takes its tax fast. Empty snares, a cold stream, and a hunger that gnaws louder than coyotes. By day 9, the money adds up, but her strength doesn't. Then, on a fog-slick ridge, the ground gives way. She's left dangling above a bed of jagged rock, fingers numb, breath burning, the emergency beacon miles behind. Silence presses in, until two golden eyes appear at the rim. Not a rescuer, not a friend. A bobcat, silent, unblinking, moves with eerie purpose. What happens next isn't in any survival manual. Madison will have to decide what to believe, when to trust the wild, when to trust herself, and when to press the one button that ends everything. The helicopter blades whirred overhead, kicking up dust and pine needles as Madison Clark stepped onto the forest floor. At 26, she'd never imagined herself here, in the heart of Montana's wilderness, about to embark on the most challenging experience of her life. The reality show's premise was simple: survive alone in the wild for as long as possible, earning $10,000 for each day completed. What wasn't simple was everything else. "Remember," the producer shouted over the helicopter noise. "Emergency beacon if you need immediate evacuation, otherwise you're on your own." Madison nodded, clutching her minimal supplies. A tarp, some paracord, a knife, basic first aid kit, and enough rations for maybe a week if she stretched them. As the helicopter disappeared over the tree line, the silence that followed was deafening. She was utterly alone. The first order of business was shelter. Madison had watched enough survival shows to know that exposure could kill faster than hunger. She found a cluster of pine trees with low-hanging branches and began gathering materials. Pine needles would serve as insulation, the tarp as a roof. In her scavenging, she discovered something unexpected: a broken piece from what looked like an old playground swing set, probably blown in from some distant campground. The curved metal would make an excellent support beam. By nightfall, she had a rudimentary shelter. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep the rain off. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. Montana nights, even in early fall, were brutally cold. Madison huddled in her sleeping bag, every strange sound making her heart race. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Day 1 down, she thought. $10,000 earned. The next few days fell into a routine. Morning meant checking her snares, all empty, foraging for edible plants, slim pickings, and improving her shelter. She rationed her food carefully, a few bites of jerky here, a handful of nuts there. Water wasn't a problem. A small stream ran about 100 yards from her camp. But food was becoming an issue. By day 5, Madison had consumed half her rations and caught nothing. The berries she'd found were few and far between. She tried fishing with an improvised spear but came up empty. Hunger was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a constant, gnawing presence. $50,000, she said aloud on the morning of day 6, needing to hear a human voice even if it was her own. Almost enough to pay off student loans. But money seemed abstract out here. What mattered was the next meal, the next night survived. She'd found some edible roots and cattail shoots near the stream, but they did little to ease the hunger. Her energy was flagging. Day 9 arrived with an empty food bag. The last of her jerky was gone. Madison sat by her small fire, poking at the coals with a stick. She'd made it this far. $90,000. It was more money than she'd ever seen, but her body was telling her to quit. Her clothes hung loose, her hands shook when she tried to work on her shelter, and dizzy spells came more frequently. That's when she made the declaration that would change everything. $1 million, she announced to the trees, to the sky, to whatever wildlife might be listening. I'm staying until I hit 1 million. 100 days. It was ambitious. It was probably foolish. But Madison had always been stubborn. Her mother used to say she'd argue with a fence post if given the chance. That stubbornness had gotten her through college, through her father's death, through a dozen other challenges. It would get her through this. Day 10 dawned gray and misty. Madison's plan was to explore further from camp, maybe find better foraging grounds or signs of larger game. She'd fashioned a walking stick and set out, following a deer trail that wound up the mountainside. The trail was steep, and in her weakened state, every step took effort. She paused frequently, catching her breath, fighting the lightheadedness that threatened to overwhelm her. Maybe she should turn back. Maybe. The ground gave way. It happened so fast Madison barely had time to scream. One moment she was on solid ground, the next she was falling, branches whipping past her face, rocks scraping her arms. She hit something hard, a tree branch, and instinctively wrapped her arms around it. The branch held, but barely, creaking ominously under her weight. Madison looked down and immediately wished she hadn't. The drop was at least 30 feet onto jagged rocks. Her legs dangled uselessly, and when she tried to pull herself up, her weakened arms simply didn't have the strength. Panic set in. "Help!" she screamed, knowing it was useless. No one was coming. The emergency beacon was back at camp. "Please, somebody." Hours passed. The branch continued to creak. Madison's arms went from aching to numb. She tried everything, swinging her legs to reach the cliff face, shifting her weight to climb higher. But each movement made the branch groan more ominously. Dehydration made her thoughts fuzzy. Maybe this was how it ended. Maybe. A soft sound made her look up. Golden eyes stared down at her from the cliff edge. A bobcat. Madison's heart, already racing, seemed to stop entirely. The cat was beautiful. Tawny fur with dark spots, tufted ears, powerful muscles evident even in its relaxed posture. It watched her with an intensity that was neither hostile nor friendly, just curious. "Please," Madison whispered, not sure what she was asking for. "Please." The bobcat tilted its head, then disappeared from view. Madison felt despair wash over her. Of course it left. Why would it stay? But then she heard movement. Not above, but to her right. The bobcat had descended partway down the cliff using a series of small ledges she hadn't noticed. It moved with casual grace, as if gravity were merely a suggestion. It paused on a ledge about 5 feet away and looked at her. Then it looked pointedly at the ledges. Back at her. Back at the ledges. Was it showing her a path? Madison studied where the bobcat had stepped. There, a small outcropping she could maybe reach with her foot if she swung just right. And from there, another ledge, and another. A natural staircase she'd been too panicked to see. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay." The first move was the hardest. Letting go with one hand to reach for the cliff face went against every instinct. But the branch was weakening. She could feel it starting to splinter. It was move or fall. She swung her legs, found the first ledge with her foot, tested it, solid. Now the terrifying part, letting go of the branch. Madison said a prayer to whatever forces had sent the bobcat and pushed off. For a heart-stopping moment, she was neither on the branch nor secure on the ledge. Then her fingers found purchase on the rock face, and she pressed herself against the cliff, breathing hard. The bobcat watched from its perch, patient as stone. Step by step, ledge by ledge, Madison made her way down. Several times she had to stretch further than felt safe, had to trust holds that seemed impossibly small. But each time she looked over, the bobcat was there, golden eyes steady and calm. When she finally reached solid ground, her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the rocky floor. The bobcat descended the rest of the way with liquid grace and approached slowly. Madison held her breath. Wild animals were unpredictable, and she was in no state to defend herself. But the cat simply walked past her, paused, and looked back. "Follow me." The message was as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. Madison struggled to her feet and followed. Every step was agony, but the bobcat kept a steady pace, occasionally pausing to ensure she was still behind. They wound through the forest, following paths Madison would never have found on her own. Just when she thought she couldn't take another step, she heard it. The blessed sound of running water. A creek, wider and deeper than the stream near her camp, curved through a grove of aspens. The bobcat led her to a specific spot where the bank was low and the water pooled in a natural basin. Madison fell to her knees and drank deeply, the cold water like life itself flowing back into her body. When she finally looked up, the bobcat was sitting a few yards away, grooming its paw with studied indifference. But it didn't leave. As the sun began to set, Madison realized she had no idea how to get back to her camp. Everything looked different from this side of the mountain. But the bobcat seemed to have other plans. It rose and walked along the creek bank to where a massive fallen tree created a natural shelter. Beneath it, hidden behind hanging moss and branches, was a den. The bobcat disappeared inside, then emerged and sat, looking at Madison expectantly. "You want me to stay here?" she asked. A slow blink was her answer. Madison gathered what strength she had left and began preparing a shelter near the den. Not too close. She wasn't foolish enough to crowd a wild predator, but close enough that she felt oddly protected. Using branches and the moss that grew abundantly here, she created a bed elevated off the damp ground. As darkness fell, she curled up in her makeshift shelter, hungry but alive. She woke to a soft thud near her head. In the dim dawn light, she saw the bobcat sitting a few feet away. At her feet lay a rabbit, still warm. Madison stared at the offering in disbelief. The bobcat watched her with those inscrutable golden eyes, then turned and padded back to its den. "Thank you," Madison whispered. She'd never cleaned wild game before, but hunger is a powerful teacher. Using her knife and half-remembered YouTube videos, she managed to skin and clean the rabbit. Building a fire took 3 attempts with shaking hands, but finally, she had flames. The smell of cooking meat made her dizzy with anticipation. That rabbit was the best meal of her life. Days passed in this strange new rhythm. Madison built a better shelter near the creek, even constructing a small dock-like platform over the water for washing and filling her water bottle. The bobcat came and went, sometimes disappearing for days, other times lounging near her camp with feline nonchalance. Twice more it brought her food, another rabbit and once a grouse. She supplemented these gifts with her own foraging, which was more successful here. The creek hosted cattail roots, watercress, and even some freshwater clams. She fashioned better tools, improved her shelter with a raised bed to stay warmer, and slowly felt her strength returning. On day 15, while gathering firewood, Madison found herself talking to the bobcat, who was supervising from a sunny rock. "You know, I had a cat growing up, Mr. Whiskers. Dumbest name ever, but I was 6. She laughed, the sound strange after so much silence. "He used to bring me dead mice. Mom hated it, but I always thought he was trying to take care of me. Guess that's what you're doing, huh?" The bobcat yawned, showing impressive fangs, then went back to dozing. The nights were still brutal. Even with her improved shelter and better nutrition, the cold was a constant enemy. But something had changed. The forest no longer felt hostile. Maybe it was the steady presence of the creek, or the way she'd learned to read the signs of weather in the clouds, or maybe it was the strange companionship of the bobcat. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. On day 18, Madison made a discovery that changed everything. Following the creek upstream in search of better fishing spots, she found where it joined a proper river. Not huge, but substantial. Wide enough that fallen trees created natural bridges, deep enough that she could see fish swimming in the darker pools. "This is it," she told the bobcat, who had accompanied her on the expedition. "This is how I make it to 100 days. She spent day 19 constructing a fish trap, weaving branches together in a design she'd seen in a survival manual years ago. It was crude but functional. By evening, she'd caught 3 decent-sized trout. That night, as she cooked her fish over the fire, Madison did the math. 19 days. $190,000. It was enough to pay off her loans, help her mom with the mortgage, even start that business she'd always dreamed of. But more than that, she'd proven something to herself. She could do hard things. She could survive when everything seemed hopeless. She'd made a friend of the wilderness and earned the trust of one of its most elusive predators. The next morning, day 20, dawned clear and cold. Madison sat by her fire, the bobcat lounging nearby, and held the emergency beacon in her hand. One press, and a helicopter would come. One press, and she'd return to the world of schedules and traffic and electric lights. She looked at the bobcat. "What do you think, friend? Keep going?" The cat stretched luxuriously, then fixed her with that steady golden gaze. And in that look, Madison saw what she'd been missing. The bobcat wasn't her pet or her guardian. It was a wild creature that had chosen, for reasons of its own, to help her. And now it was time for both of them to return to their real lives. "You're right," she said softly. "We've both got places to be." Madison pressed the beacon. The helicopter arrived 2 hours later, the crew astonished at finding her not at her original camp but miles away by the river. As she climbed aboard, Madison looked back one last time. The bobcat sat at the edge of the tree line, watching. "Thank you," she mouthed. The cat blinked once, slowly, then melted back into the forest. The story Madison told upon her return captivated audiences. Not the survival tactics or the physical challenges, but the bond formed between human and wild animal. Critics called it impossible, said she must have been hallucinating from hunger. But Madison knew the truth. She had the scars from her fall, the memory of golden eyes, and a respect for the wild that went bone deep. The $200,000 changed her life in practical ways. No more student debt, a safety net for her family, seed money for an outdoor education program she started for inner-city kids. But the real change was deeper. She'd learned that kindness existed in unexpected places, that connection could transcend species, that sometimes the universe sent exactly what you needed in the form you least expected. 6 months later, Madison returned to Montana. Not for cameras or money, but for closure. She hiked back to the creek, to the fallen tree that had sheltered the den. The area looked different in spring, greener, more alive. She'd brought something with her, a fresh trout, caught that morning from a nearby stream. Madison placed the fish on a flat rock near the den entrance. A gift for a gift. "I don't know if you're still here," she said to the forest, "but thank you. For everything." She turned to leave, then stopped. There, at the edge of her vision, a familiar form. The bobcat stood watching her from beside a tree, and Madison's heart swelled. But then movement caught her eye. 2 smaller forms tumbling in the grass behind their mother. Kids. The bobcat had kids. Understanding flooded through Madison. No wonder the cat had helped her, had shared precious food. One mother recognizing another creature in need, extending help across the vast divide between wild and civilized. The bobcat picked up the fish in her mouth, gave Madison one last long look, and disappeared into the underbrush with her babies. Madison hiked out with tears streaming down her face. Not of sadness, but of gratitude. She'd come to the wilderness seeking money and found something worth far more. Proof that compassion existed everywhere. That connection was possible between all living things. That sometimes the most profound gifts came from the most unexpected sources. Back in her everyday life, when things got hard, when the world seemed cold and uncaring, Madison would close her eyes and remember. Golden eyes in the forest, a warm rabbit on a cold morning, and the lesson that we're never as alone as we think we are. The wild had taught her that, through the heart of a bobcat who chose to care. And in her outdoor education program, when she took city kids into the woods for the first time, she always ended with the same message. Respect the wild, but don't fear it. You never know where you'll find a friend. Some of the kids would roll their eyes, too cool for sentiment. But sometimes, 1 or 2 would listen with wide eyes, sensing the truth behind the words. And Madison would smile, knowing that someday when they needed it most, they'd remember. Kindness exists everywhere, even in the heart of a predator, even in the depths of the wilderness, even when all seems lost. The forest keeps its own counsel, guards its own secrets. But sometimes, just sometimes, it opens its heart and shows us that we're all connected. Predator and prey, wild and tame, human and animal. All of us just trying to survive, all of us capable of extraordinary grace. And somewhere in Montana, a bobcat raises her kits with the bounty of the land and perhaps, on quiet nights, remembers the strange 2-legged creature who shared her territory for a time. 2 mothers, 2 survivors, bound forever by a moment of mutual recognition and inexplicable kindness. That's the real treasure Madison found in the wilderness. Not the money, though that helped, but the proof that miracles still happened, that angels sometimes wore fur and fangs, and that when you thought you were most alone, that's when the universe might send exactly what you needed. Even if it came on 4 paws, with golden eyes and a wild, wild heart.